via leaf traits. So we've seen measurements of photosynthesis, for example, and even through to those DNA methylation. I don't know about that thing that was talked about by Isabella, I think, or something. I can't remember, sorry. And they also operate at the community level. And similarly, fire interacts across these broad scales because the flammability of materials is governed by molecular scale reactions, so atomic and molecular scale reactions, through to materials, properties, and the whole structural properties of an ecosystem. And so this means that plant traits must influence flammability. So if we look at the whole ecosystem, certain ecosystems will be supportive of crown fire regimes where the fires run through the canopy, whereas others will support surface fires where the fires run in the understory of a forest. And if we look then at the components and plant part scale, morphology, for example, such as leaf traits, such as size and shape, are well known to influence litter flammability because it alters the packing ratio of the fuel and therefore oxygen supply to the fire. Ooh, I always do something wrong. But then if we look at the materials properties, there's actually been much less research done on this. And what we don't know is about how material properties influence their flammability. And of course, the material properties of leaves are what's changing more directly in response to those environmental changes. And because plant traits are likely the most, leaf level traits are the most plastic traits. For example, chemistry can be rapidly changed according to environmental factors. So over the past few years, we've been studying the influence of variations in aspects of leaf traits in response to environmental variations and to what extent these influence leaf level flammability. And what we've tried to think of as much as possible, and I don't have measurements for all of these because we've been kind of trying to do this research as and when we find suitable things to work on. If something changes photosynthesis, we're obviously going to change leaf structural and chemical investment, and that has to influence leaf flammability. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to show two lab-based studies where we've exposed selected plants to increase temperature, but also enhanced atmospheric carbon dioxide, 1500 ppm, so a big increase in CO2. And with these two studies, we've assessed interspecific leaf level responses. We've then also looked at, well, if we look at one species, do we see intraspecific variations in leaf level traits, say across a latitudinal gradient? And then we wanted to look at, because obviously these are going to be these plastic responses and phenotypic variability that we can see in these. And then we wanted to look at, well, are leaf level traits and their flammability selected for? Because our aim really is to consider to what extent these leaf level traits are conserved in phenotypes and operate to determine the fitness in surviving fire through the long history of time and into our future. So the first study is looking at changes in temperature and how those influence flammability. So here we've picked the living fossil Ginkgo biloba because we thought, well, if we can look at its changes through time, its changes in response to temperature, we can see maybe how it could change in the past and into the future. So in the top three box plots, I've got what I've called plant food because they're all photosynthesis type relationships. The left-hand boxes are grown at 25 degrees, the right-hand are at 35 degrees centigrade. And we can see that, for example, stomatal control decreases at 35 degrees, and so did the maximum rate of photosynthesis. And then if we look at how that maybe translates into what the plants are doing in their chemistry, we've measured the leaf lignin content, where we saw an increase at 35 degrees centigrade, and carbon and nitrogen, you can see they do the opposite as would be expected. So a decrease in carbon content, which is typically flammable, but an increase in nitrogen content, which is typically not so flammable. If I look at those structural traits, we can see that leaf thickness increased in higher temperatures, as did leaf mass per area, which I think is similar to some of the results you might be finding in BIFoR with the oaks. And if we look at the leaf construction costs, therefore, overall, the construction costs were much higher at high CO2. Now, the important bit from my perspective is these two boxes, which are the flammability metrics. So on the left, we have what's called peak heat release rate, and this is like the maximum intensity of flaming that leaf gives when it burns. And then the other property, which is called total heat release, is the total amount of energy that leaf releases when it's burning. And we can see that in both these cases, they were decreased at 35 degrees centigrade in ginkgo biloba, I should say. Okay, so what about changing carbon dioxide levels and flammability? So here, this is some work with Jenny, who spoke yesterday. We've got 3 species that kind of have obviously a very deep time relationship. So again, ginkgo, then we've got a tree fern, Zixonia antarctica, and Agathis australis, which is kind of a morphological equivalent of broadleaf conifers, or much more much more abundant and diverse in the geological past. So again, I've got these plots where I've got kind of like the building blocks of the plants. So this is lignin content, and this is volatiles, this Agathis, Zixonia, ginkgo. The controls, so grown in ambient conditions, are the black bars, and the treatments, the high CO2, are the white boxes. So in Agathis, we could see that there was a decrease in both lignin content and terpene contents, and this seemed to explain the decrease in leaf level flammability as well. Zixonia didn't really respond so much in either case, and we can see that there's not much to report in the volatile change, but there was a decrease in lignin. So it seems that the driver of the decrease in lignin flammability that we saw, leaf flammability that we saw, is more driven by lignin than Zixonia. But then if we look at ginkgo, again, this was more driven by decrease in volatile content, because actually it essentially goes up the lignin content, or this is probably not significant, but this was. And we can see that that translates to quite a big decrease in the flammability of ginkgo leaves. So this is a whistle-stop tour of these research. So then we wanted to look at intraspecific variation and flammability in real-world plant communities. So we've looked at Pinus halepensis, which is the Aleppo pine, and we've looked at its leaf traits and flammability across its native range in Spain, because this is a very important native species in Spain. And it also has several fire-adapted traits. So we collected needles and analysed these from natural stands across the length of Spain, from the south to the north. We looked at their leaf level biochemical traits and morphology, and also compared these to climatic factors. So what these plots show are temperature range along the bottom, and then we've got basically terpene ratios, lignin, and those flammability relationships again. And we looked at lots of different variabilities of the environment, but what we found that correlated the most was the range in temperatures that those trees experienced. So we saw that leaf moisture content typically decreased from the south to the north, and that dry leaf needles were more flammable. And monoterpene content, which is the smaller of the terpene molecules, increased from north to south, where sesquiterpene content was then greatest. And this seemed to correlate with the sites that had the greatest temperature range. So you had higher sesquiterpene contents where the range in temperature that the tree experienced was the greatest. And we also found the highest flammability leaves in the regions that had the greatest temperature range across the year, matching with this monoterpene sesquiterpene ratio, which I'm showing here. So on these graphs, I've got our flammability proxies. So here our peak heat release rate measurement, our total heat release rate, and this is the monoterpene sesquiterpene ratio. So the most southern sites have the highest flammability, as you can see here, because they have more sesquiterpenes. And in general, generally the sites with more sesquiterpenes had higher peak heat release and higher total heat release as well. So we can conclude that biogeographic factors contribute to phenotypic variations in leaf level flammability. So then we wanted to ask, well, are leaf level traits and their flammability selected for? In other words, do they confer a fitness to certain fire environments? So plants have two distinctive relationships with fire. Firstly, they obviously provide the fuel that drives the fire, but they can also adapt to the dynamics of the fire itself. And they can also then respond to fire behavior that they create in order to survive. So we looked at 13 different species of pine that were co-located in a common garden experiment a long time ago. But they were drawn from populations that are known to known to have known to have crown fires. So some of these are basically crown fire adapted, and others, so like this is a crown fire, or some are adapted to surface fire regimes. And the ones that are adapted to surface fire regimes are called fire tolerator. They have a fire tolerator syndrome, and typically they shed their branches to keep their canopy out the way of fires, so they create surface fires underneath. Whereas the fire embracers say, it's fine, I'm happy to burn, I'm going to encourage flames into my canopy because I have other adaptations that will help continue my young. So again, we of course assess leaf level terpene content and flammability from these 13 species. So in these graphs, we looked at variations in terpene contents and the energy release across winter, spring and summer. We found that in generally the winter needles have the highest terpene contents. But overall, what we were kind of surprised about is that all these orange boxes show the terpene content or the flammability of those needles derived from crown fire regimes, where they would be typically having big crown fires in the canopy, whereas the ones in black were derived from surface fire regimes, and which showed that actually the surface fire regime conifers, pines, are more flammable than those in crown fire regimes. So we found that crown fire pines were less flammable at the leaf level than species found in surface fire or non-fire regimes. So this is a longleaf pine, which is a fire tolerator pine. And they typically have long needles that form less compacted litter than those with short needles. And these have a lower bulk density litters, which mean that you get more intense fires. So our results suggest that these types of pines that have surface fire regimes typically have higher terpene contents, which additionally enhances their flammability, again enhancing that intense and rapidly spreading fires in leaf litter. So we can assume that where moderation of terpene content in these surface fire regime pine needles, this may be capable of altering the fire environment, as we can see. And if this is favourable for growth and establishment of their offspring, which it's believed to be, then this would constitute a biochemical form of niche construction. So we can see that the evolution of flammability implies selection for traits that influence the frequency and the intensity of fire. So to summarise, I have my title of past, present and future. So the two sort of big findings, I guess, that our research has shown so far is that leaf chemical shifts and their influence on flammability can be driven by extrinsic factors, so temperature, CO2, temperature range, for example, which probably is not a surprise in a sense to many of you when you think about what the leaves are doing. But interestingly, the modulation of leaf terpene content levels by pines may serve to control fire, which alongside other adaptive traits appears to support their competitive advantage and survival. And we can see that this is the case in both intra and interspecific leaf level traits. Both of these appear to influence flammability. And it seems that in some populations where we've taken those trees out of their fire environment and co-located them, these traits are conserved, likely through time and space. So where different species have selected for these variations, this supports fitness in fire-prone ecosystems. And I wonder whether this forms something called pyrotypic variation. Of course, I want to add pyro to any word that I can. So looking forwards, this is going to matter because in the face of future climate change, ecophysiological adaptations, including biochemical traits, are likely to impact leaf level flammability, which you guys know that it's changing the chemistry and what the leaves are built of. And this also means that leaf level inter and intraspecific variation should not be overlooked if we're trying to understand the balance of what's influencing plants and fire. And potentially these pyrotypic variations, therefore, influence plants' continued successful functioning in time and space, and therefore their successful functioning in the future phase of global change. Thank you.
Thank you very much for an exciting talk. We will move straight on to the next speaker and have questions at the end of the session. Can I ask people online and in the audience to continue adding the questions to the Padlet link that we have, same as yesterday? Just add it to the top of the session and we'll pick that up as we get to the end. And thank you. I'd like to now introduce our next speaker is Kerin Little from the School of Geography, Earth and Environmental Sciences at the university, who's a postdoctoral researcher, and her title is Wildfire Danger Across Spatio-Temporal Scales, and follows very nicely on from our previous talk.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We'll test if the click is working. I can use the mouse, it's fine. Good morning. Today I'm going to be talking about smaller spatiotemporal scales than what we have been talking about, specifically about wildfire danger and how the factors that influence wildfire danger vary from across landscapes to across regions, and from daily timescales right up to seasonal and interannual timescales. So this is part of my PhD research that was supervised by Nick Kittredge and Laura Graham, funded by PyroLife, which is a Marie Curie ITN, and it also includes some work by the NERC-funded project toward a UK fire danger rating system. So fire danger refers to the combination of factors that affect the initiation, spread, and ease of control of wildfires. And there are three groups of factors that are important for determining wildfire danger. That is the fuel moisture, fire weather, and fire behavior. And today I'll be mainly focusing on fuel moisture and fire weather. So fire weather, the weather conditions that are conducive to wildfires occurring, and fuel moisture, the water content of vegetation or how dry the fuels are. This is a really simplified representation of quite a complicated system, but these groups of factors interact with each other and are important for quantifying wildfire danger, which can then be communicated through wildfire danger rating assessments, most commonly like these watermelon segments you can see here,